In this edition of SmartBites, the second of the two-part series on Agile, Tathagat Varma outlines what it takes to great Agile implementation. He is currently the country head of NerdWallet, a thought leader, a mentor, and also an author. Over the years, we have used words like philosophy, like Deming philosophy, processes like CMM. Now we have a beautiful word called mindset. Educate us on when we talk about Agile, it's probably a mix of all. How do you reasonably mix so that you deliver real value? The philosophy, practice, principles, mindsets, methods, tools.
I think the tools and the processes and methods, they actually impose some constraints. These are the constraints, right? A software, in my view, is a problem-solving process where we are trying to take a shot at how we should be solving that problem. What is the best way of solving that problem? So now if I look at the philosophical element of that, what we are saying is that a software is a way in which we are encoding a problem solving from a given point of view. So if I am the designer, I thought of a particular way in which I am solving the problem, and I am encoding that in a kind of a medium. Software is only the medium, right? It could have been any other medium, for example, there in which I have solved the problem there. What is the right way for me to solve the problem? Should I have a world view which is based on me as a designer, or should I have a world view based on you as a consumer of that? Now, if you are the consumer, who is the real consumer of that? Philosophically, to me, the first most important thing is to understand we are not building software for ourselves or for people like us. We are building software for a given audience, and we need to be mindful and respectful of how they solve the problems there. So I think, to me, the philosophical element is really all about whom are we building it for, and are we mindful of the fact that this is how people solve their problems there. The mindset, to me, is the next way in which we basically take the next step forward. Then we say, hey, now that I have understood the world view from how people look at it, how do I really solve the problem? Do I wait for a fully baked way of doing it, and then we say, hey, this is how we are going to do. Unless everything is done, I'm not even going to start there. Or I say, I understand how it is, and I understand that the basic idea is that we cannot solve the problem in a single pass. Every complex problem will best be solved in a very iterative manner, in a very collaborative way, in which do I treat my consumers as just passive consumers, where I'm saying whatever I dish out to them, they will accept it, or I say that even without the software, they are living, right? I mean, they are solving the problem day in and day out, which means they have some wisdom about how a good solution should work out. If I partner with them and I treat them as a co-creator rather than a passive consumer, then I can actually create better solution. So my mindset, to me, is all about saying these are not passive consumers, these are co-creators. So they are on my team, so I start teaming up with them. So to me, the mindset is really all about saying, how do I solve the problem? At a problem level, then I as an individual, we talk about agile mindset. What does it even mean? The agile mindset very simply is something that we keep borrowing from the work by a Stanford professor, Carol Dweck. She wrote this book on mindset, where she talked about fixed mindset versus growth mindset, where the whole idea is that some people have a fixed mindset and say this is the only way this should be done, and they have a very, very strong point of view. They are not willing to budge from that opinion. But there are people who are saying, hey, maybe there is a better way of doing it. Maybe there are other ways in which we can grow there. We may not succeed in that, but that's okay. In the process of doing it, we'll stumble upon some other truths, and that will help us eventually get to the right solution there. So having that kind of a mindset where I'm open to experimentation, open to learning, I'm willing to take some meaningful risks there, I'm not scared of the failure, I'm willing to kind of keep iterating over it. That is a very important kind of mindset. So we need to have a culture that really supports that thing. To me, that's the third piece of the whole thing there. Organizations where making mistakes is a sin. Organizations where, for example, somebody comes and says, hey, what did you do last week? And he says, I failed 3 times. And that person gets reprimanded. That the agile thinking may not work there, because you need to have a tolerance for intelligent failures. You need to have that kind of an appetite where you are able to say, this guy made a mistake, come on, let's have a small party, let's learn from that person there. And if it's a great mistake, we actually make a big deal about the whole thing there. So that agile mindset will not fit into a very conventional kind of a culture where people are saying, don't make any mistakes, do everything right the first time, everything has to be Six Sigma. I'm always reminded of this very nice quote by my favorite management professor Gary Hamel, where he said, thank God for the biological screw-ups. If not for that, we would still all be slime, right? Because it's a Six Sigma world. The evolution would not have happened if animals did not probably genetically recombine with each other in novel ways there. So I think if we are really looking at a very creative ways of doing things, and we are looking for finding some novel solutions to that, one has to have a tolerance for bringing the agile mindset into the workplace. And the agile mindset is like the seed that requires an agile culture as a fertile ground, otherwise it will not sprout there. So that is how I would see. Now, tools and methods and processes are to me the next set of maybe the fourth order and the fifth order extensions of that, because in order for us to do the job properly, we need the tools. Unfortunately, what happens is people get it totally wrong. They ignore the whole holistic part of why we are doing it, the whole philosophical element, the mindset and the culture, but they straight away jump onto the tools and the methods bandwagon because that's the easiest thing to sell. The tool, method and processes are really the third, fourth, fifth order functions of the core thing, but the whole idea is if we don't really start on some of these basics, we will never get to the point. If we start only with the tools and all, it might give a short-term win, but then it is not sustainable and it may definitely not be scalable in the long run. That's my thought process on that.
Brilliant. There seems to be a serious emphasis on automated tests in agile development. Are we overdoing testing? Could we snip the muda, that is the waste or the bugs in this case, at a much earlier stage by prevention?
So I think it's a holy grail of software development, right? We have seen from CMM days, defect prevention has been a holy grail. But I think we fail to recognize that software in itself is not isolated and independent. The context in which it is operating is changing all the time. Whether it is the systems around it that keep changing, hardware is evolving, software is evolving, network is evolving, and the user behavior is evolving there. People probably found it very novel to use 10 years back when iPhone came, pinch and zoom, but today it's a standard, it's a given everywhere. So obviously the context in which people are changing is also changing all the time. I think on the face of it, definitely that makes sense. Doing it's a good old saying, a stitch in time saves 9 kind of a thing. And yes, we have seen during the waterfall days how the cost of defect amplifies over which is I think in some sense still true there. Even if we say we are agile, if you have to fix a defect in the production, it still costs a lot there. So definitely prevention will have its own role to play. But one of the other things that I also see is I think we are going to a point where we are doing a lot of software reuse, whether it is third parties, whether it is open source. So we don't always have a control over a lot of components that we are going to take. I mean, you get a component from somewhere and you just have to use that. Do you have really insight into what went into when it was being designed? Do you have a control over what kind of defect prevention steps were taken into that? We may or may not know, right? So I think we will still need some way of qualifying the components and putting them together, and the speed at which we are aiming to really push our systems into production. It will require a lot of us to reuse, and I think in some sense software construction is being reduced to plumbing the whole thing. It's like the job of an architect. How do you build a 100-story building? You don't make a brick anymore. You don't make a steel pipe. You just source it from everywhere and then you put it together, and then you create a system in which you are able to, one is do some kind of an incoming check criteria. So you are saying, hey, is this of the acceptable quality to me? So you are doing some kind of a component testing to see whether they meet your requirements. And then secondly, you will need to put them together and see whether they don't burn each other out kind of a thing there. So they have to wait. So I think, and then if we put it in the context that I have to release this into production 100 times a day, I think it is kind of inevitable in my view that we will end up doing a lot of automated testing. However, I do see your point. I think at some point we have to understand that if I am blindly relying on automated testing to solve uncover every problem, that might be a little dangerous statement to make. I think I should use it to really make sure that whatever was the behavior in the last build to now, that remains unchanged and that remains unbroken. That's a good verification for me. But if there are new features or new behaviors that we have introduced there, that I don't think you can delegate it to the automated testing to begin with. It might need a lot of subjectivity. So I would be a little careful in that. I don't have a yes and no answer for that, but I think the balance is probably the answer in my view.
In this digital age, what do you believe is the role of human intellect in QA?
I think that's a very profound question. First, I want to answer what do I think is the role of a human in the whole space, and then come to QA. In my view, the biggest role of human being in the coming years, in the era of cognitive computing and other kind of things, will be to ask the right questions, not really to give the right answers. I think right answers, we have enough point of views on that, and as we have seen, technology will solve a lot of problems there. I mean, 200 years back, when in England and in Manchester, people were doing all kind of textile related work, and they invented cotton gin. It improved the productivity, I believe, by 500 times. But that was basically giving a right answer to that, right? So I think technology will keep changing. We will keep changing technology, and we will continue to do that. An equivalent of a cotton gin will keep coming in the in software industry and testing. That will solve the problem. But I think the more meaningful thing will be asking the right questions. Hey, what is the right kind of problem should we be solving? What is the most meaningful problem? What is the most impactful issue that we should be solving? To me, it is the equivalent of what I like to call it as the most provocative vision, which is I heard from Mohammed Yunus, the founder of Grameen Bank, where he says we want to build a museum of poverty. Now, it's such a profound statement because you can feel connected to that statement there, where you say, hey, this is the problem I want to solve, because it's the most meaningful question somebody is asking, that we will eliminate poverty to the extent that the only way you will ever get to see poverty is by going into a museum, right? Like the way we go and see museum today. So to me, I think the human intellect will have an even higher ask actually in the coming time, because a lot of routine and mundane will be taken away by automation. Because whatever I am doing, maybe you might do 30% of the work is just plain routine thing, answering some routine emails. Maybe you can set some smart filters, and that will process the mails there, right? So I think a lot of that time bandwidth will keep getting freed up, but eventually we will be left with less time but more impactful questions to ask. And so in my view, the people who will be making the most impact in the coming time will be asking the right questions there. Let me come to QA. To me, QA is a mindset in the coming time, and not limited to a person or a role or a function. So it is going to be a mindset of, hey, this is the kind of a system we want to build. How do we really make sure that this is the right system? I'm going to, let's say, make healthcare affordable for everyone. Maybe in the next few years we will have a cure for cancer, or we will have some other solution. Maybe we'll have we can take oral vaccine for diabetes. Some of that stuff is already people are talking about it for some time. So how do you make sure that these are the solutions that ensure that there is a right kind of solution without any untoward or side effects, for example, there? And those are the kind of questions we need to be prepared to ask at each level, whether I'm building a healthcare solution, whether I'm building a transport solution, whether I'm building a solution, for example, for the poorest of the 2 billion people on earth there. So I think the way I look at QA role is that, first of all, in my view, QA, everyone has to put on the hat of a QA and say, hey, okay, how do we really make sure that when we are done doing it, that it is actually done? That to me is the simplest form of QA. So that is number one. Now, that doesn't mean that we are really belittling the importance of QA as a function, but we are saying people who are solving the problem should always have that in mind. We might call it as a test driven development in some sense, that hey, I am thinking of how I am going to test it, and then I am going to do that. Now, if I am a career QA professional, to me what it essentially means is not living in a separate room, or not living in my own ivory tower and saying, okay, whatever specs are given to me, I'm going to qualify against it. Because in all honesty, there are no specs. Especially when we are creating a 1.0, there are no specs available there. The specs are in the mind of all the 6 people who are sitting around the dining table. So I think if I am a QA professional who is really involved in the 1.0 kind of a work, I better be an integral part of the whole team there and not really have a classical producer consumer kind of a relationship with the team, but I am a part of the team that is creating a great software. That's how I would look at it. Take the metaphor of mock programming. I think mock programming is a great metaphor. So if the whole team is really solving a problem and the 6 people are sitting and everybody is thinking about it, to me a great QA professional is not just asking about how I'm going to test it, but a great QA professional is even saying, why are we doing the design this way? Maybe there is a better way of doing the design. And the reason why she or he is able to bring that perspective is because they have such a deep understanding from the field of how a given design pattern behaves when it is deployed in a given scenario there, which a lot of developers in the team may not have that. So to me, the QA professional is not about saying, okay, my manager has given me a target, I have to file 30 bugs every week, I'm going to do that come what may. It is not about saying which are the written specs, I'm going to only qualify the software against it. To me, a great QA professional would actually be a part of the team which is doing the collective designing of a solution there and bringing a lot of perspective. And in some sense, it also reflects a lot about one of the earlier question you had, which was, hey, can we really prevent a lot of these bugs from happening in the first place? And I think that to me is really the biggest value addition of the QA professional by asking those questions and saying, hey, why are we doing this way? If we change and use this particular metaphor, then maybe we'll not have those many field issues there. And that perspective for somebody who has been deep in the field there is really the value add of that. So I would say that I think QA professionals actually have a very strong role to play, because a lot of developers by definition, by role, by design, they tend to be very focused in the module that they are working on. They don't always get to see, and I of course exceptions notwithstanding, they don't always get to see the big picture and say, okay, how is it really how is it really operating in the field. But a lot of QA professionals who have a more systems view of the whole thing might be able to bring that perspective, and that I think is really the collective intellect that is required of the team. So that's where I would feel that I think QA has a strong role to play in the coming years.